Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, February the 20th. And welcome to our commentary. Today we'll be chatting with our good friend Frank Burke up in Wisconsin. In fact, there's Frank right there. Frank, welcome. It's always great to see you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Likewise.
Well,
Uh,
this is kind of, if I may just put in a little selfish note here at the beginning,
sure.
and that is that this is kind of a sad day for North Texas because Neiman Marcus, the famous Neiman Marcus in downtown Dallas, which had been a landmark there for years, has decided to close. It's not that they're going out of business, it's just that I guess that's not a good location anymore or whatever. And it's kind of sad because I have some memories of that store. It was always, my father used to work like in the next block. So whenever I would give my dad a ride or whatever, I would drive by the store, and there it was, very well known store. So I just wanted to say I'm sorry that, but it's what happens in business. In that business, Frank, the retail business is kind of tough these days, and you probably know a lot about that.
Well, it really is terrible because when you look at all of the great old stores, I can remember Marshall Field
Oh
on
yes,
State Street in Chicago. And, that was famous for its restaurant, the
yes,
Oak Room. And then, you had so many in New York that some of them almost closed and they were sold and they were able to go on. But the downtown shopping store, the department store, seems to be having a lot of trouble. It's online. People are shopping online. When you look at all the troubles in downtown,
right.
do you really want to go downtown New York
Yeah,
and take
and
the
here,
subway?
no, I agree, But here, I would argue, at least in the Dallas area, it wasn't so much the crime or anything like that. I just think it was an awkward location because
Hmm.
the parking was not convenient. Uh, Whenever I went there, I didn't even park at Neiman's. I parked a few blocks away. And for a long time, whenever Beatrice and I would go to Neiman's for brunch, because they had a restaurant with a great brunch on
Yes,
Sundays,
yes.
fantastic brunch, delicious food. I would cheat and use my father's parking lot at the bank. I would go into that lot and use his parking space, which of course I knew the guy at the door,
Right.
and he knew that I was cheating, but I guess he let me get away with it. Uh, but anyway, so I never really had to trouble parking. But it is a historic. I would say a lot of people are not going to miss it because it's generational. I think. I mean, if you're
Right,
20
right.
years old, you probably don't even know that it existed. But I think a little older, you remember it as a landmark. But anyway, how is the weather up in Wisconsin? Because here we've been fighting temperatures below 32 and sometimes as low as 6 or 7, Frank.
Well, let me put it to you this way, Silvio. The night before last, the wind chill was 25 below. So
Yeah,
now,
I won't complain. I although I do remember those days when I lived in
yes,
Wisconsin. I remember days like that. At one specific morning where it was minus 30 with the windshield, and I remember I remember we couldn't get our father's car started.
yes,
So we were doing all kinds of tricks to get his car started. Eventually, we got it started. But what a memory that was. Of
yeah.
Yeah,
This is we've had it used to be like the first week in January, but now it's been on and off, and it's
yeah,
supposed to warm up a little next week, but then go back to the cold.
yes, I
So
know.
it's
Well, I guess it officially will be that way until the 20th of March when winter officially ends. But anyway, well, Frank, we want to talk about the Pope and immigration and the Catholic Church and immigration.
sure.
In the interest of full disclosure, I am a Catholic, and so I go to mass and
Likewise.
all. Yeah, so I'm talking about my church when I say these things, but I've got some what I think are some constructive ideas. But before we get to the Pope and Catholic Church and immigration, I just like to have a brief reaction from you as to these 30 days of Trump. I mean, it's been 30 days that feel more like 30 years. I mean, the guy has what? I mean, what else can he pack into a schedule, Frank?
I think it's phenomenal, and
Yeah.
I think it's really great what he has been able to do and what he's doing. And a lot of it, is what it is on the surface. It's what it is. Some of it is strategic. I think the tariffs are strategic, but it's long overdue with some of these countries that have been paying. I understand German cars, it's 3% here, and it's like 25 over there. I forget the number, but it's ridiculous, and it's time that it was evened out.
Right.
He's doing a great job, and it just amazes me that the Democrats learned nothing from the election, that they don't say, okay, we will work with you on some of this stuff.
Mhm.
This is what the people want. They seem to think it's not about what the people want, it's about what their leadership wants.
Right. No, I agree, and it's an interesting situation because you would think politically that they would benefit, or they would want to be on the right side politically of many of these things that they're discovering. I mean, who would be in favor of sending Social Security checks to people who are 200 years old?
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
who would be in favor of that? I mean, if I'm a Democrat, I'm going to say, you know what, Trump, I agree with you. Let's clean that up.
Yeah,
But they seem so obsessed with Trump. They seem so just obsessed with
yes.
Trump. It's the old Trump derangement syndrome thing. And they just, I guess maybe they'll have to lose another election, or maybe get hit harder the next midterm. I don't know. But at the moment, they're not cooperating, and I don't think they're gaining from their lack of cooperation. That's just my sense. One thing about the tariffs, and I think we talked about this a few years ago, Frank. I've always been a free trader. In other
Mhm.
words, I believe in free trade, so my instincts tell me don't do tariffs or anything like that. But I think the situation is different. We're not really engaging in free trade, because some countries have advantages over us. You mentioned the
Yes,
European automobiles. I think even with Canada, there's some situation with dairy products that we cannot
yes.
sell there, which I'm sure it's a huge disappointment for Wisconsin farmers. So, I mean, look, I think the idea that we're going to charge them the same thing they charge us seems very fair to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, because we're not really even, it's not really free trade. It's also, Frank, not 1950 anymore. In 1950, we had to defend these countries because they had been devastated by World War II. They had no way of, let's say, stopping a Soviet invasion if one came across Europe. But these countries are strong now. They can handle themselves, and they're not even paying for their defense, which is something that I find very troubling.
Sylvia, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Are you there? Are you? Okay, you may want to, let's see, Frank. Are you there? Can you hear me? Say something, Frank. Say something. Okay, I cannot hear you. I tell you what. Why don't you try to? What can you? Okay, I'm gonna remove you and just try again, please. Try again to come in. Let's see. I just heard you now.
Okay, how is that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, for something happened there, we got disconnected, but that's fine. But anyway, just to wrap it up, I mean, to wrap up this point, I mean, at one time we were talking about countries where they couldn't defend themselves against Soviet tanks coming over Europe. But that's not the case anymore. I mean, I'm not a fan of Putin, but these countries can defend themselves a lot better now than they can in 1950. So the whole situation has changed. And I think if they're not going to pay for their defense like they're supposed to under NATO, I have no sympathy for them, Frank.
That's correct. No, I would agree with you. And I think that I was making the point when we were disconnected. I think one of the reasons some of these people are afraid of what's going on with Doge and whatever is the fact that they are involved in extra legal situations with some of these institutions in the government that are spending all this money. As one commentator put it,
Yeah.
some of them may well have wives and girlfriends on the payrolls of these NGOs that are getting a lot of the money. And how do these people retire with, they have a government salary and they retire as millionaires?
Right.
How does that happen?
Well, it it doesn't happen legally. I'll put it
No,
that way.
it does not.
So something is going on. But I also think, Frank, and you've done a lot of work in management and studied management a lot. I think a lot of it is just the incompetence, the bureaucratic incompetence. That
I agree with you.
The bureaucracy is just incompetent by nature. I mean, take the example of these Social Security checks that apparently are going out to people who I guess used to live during the Civil War or something. But but anyway, I mean, there had to be somebody in the organization who would in a routine checkup, quality control checkup, would pick this up.
Yeah.
And the difference between a bureaucracy in the private sector is in the private sector, you would get points for I mean, if your company is sending out stuff to people who are no longer, or benefits to people who are no longer customers, or checks to people who no longer need them or are entitled to them. I mean, somebody in the quality control would bring this up to the manager and he would say, "Hey, great job for cleaning that up. Will you get a bonus for that or whatever?"
Yeah.
And that just doesn't happen in the bureaucracy. And it's a shame because it seems to be in every country the same problem, that bureaucracies always end up like this. They just cannot function effectively. Okay, well, let's get to our topic, the real topic today, and that is the question of the Pope, the Catholic Church, and immigration. And let me just say at the beginning that the Pope is apparently very ill. I saw a note this morning that he's very ill. So we actually, we hope for a speedy recovery. But it doesn't look good, Frank. The Pope is unfortunately has pneumonia, as I believe, and that's a tough thing to overcome when you're 89 years old, Frank.
Yes, and he has expressed the fact that he's not sure that he will recover this time.
Yeah,
and that's coming from him.
Yeah, and so it's a shame. It's a shame. So we wish the Pope the very best at these times. But there is a problem with, in my opinion, with the position of the Pope and the illegal immigration problem that we have. And he has said some things that I disagree with. I sent you an article of a Catholic priest or bishop who I tend to agree with more.
Yes,
he thinks that he believes that that legal immigration is better for society, and illegal immigration creates all kinds of unintended consequences, which is how I feel. But the Pope is, saying some things like, he doesn't want anybody arrested and doesn't want immigration raids. Well, that doesn't make any sense, Frank.
No, it doesn't. And, I think I'm going to take it back way far, the time machine, back to when some of those Social Security recipients were younger. I look at my father. My father was a very devout Catholic. He was born in Ireland. He came to this country as an immigrant, and the church was everything. Then came Vatican II. And in Vatican II, a lot of what we had been taught as being very important was swept away. And at that time, I can remember my father saying, I think he was very disillusioned by it, "I know what I have to do to save my own soul." And I think that was a way of saying that a lot of what the church was involved with may have been a lot less relevant, that you're taking on your responsibility for your personal salvation. And the church says a lot of things. Hey, we all remember, if you're my age, the sermon about why you cannot eat meat on Friday. And don't let them tell you that it's a bigger sin to waste the meat than it is to throw it out if it's Friday. Well, and then suddenly, hey, guess what, kids? Forget about it. It's
Right.
nonsense. So that's a little thing, but there were a lot of things like that. And as a result, I think to many people, many Catholics, especially American Catholics, the papacy has become less relevant,
That's
some
right.
cases irrelevant.
That's right.
I mean, when you had Pius XII, and I know there are two schools of thought about him having to do with his actions in World War II, but as I remember him, he was an extremely pious, holy man, and he confined himself to proclamations like 1954 is the year of the Blessed Virgin, and, religious things, devoutly religious, not except for a total hatred of atheistic communism, which is totally justified. He didn't get into the political machinations of other countries.
Right.
So,
And that's where I think maybe the at least this Pope has gone wrong, because I personally want the Pope to concentrate on the theology, the church, making the church more appealing to people, so that
yeah,
instead of losing Catholics, we gain Catholics. But I think somehow or another, he thought maybe this Pope, maybe he got some bad advice, that the church needed some kind of a social justice warrior, whatever.
yes.
And but it's one thing to speak against, for example, I'm okay with the Pope speaking against violence against women, for example.
Sure.
I'm against. I favor that the Pope should say, look, there has to be economic justice, and you have to take care of the poor. That
Mhm.
seems to me like a good message.
Yeah.
But it's quite another to get into climate change and to get into illegal immigration when the Pope has to know. I mean, he has to know the chaos that illegal immigration causes, including the rape of women, the violence of women, all of these things that are happening on the border. Let's say the chaos that you're seeing in Europe. So he has to know all of that.
Absolutely.
And somehow he says, well, I don't, he comes out against deportation raids. Well, so what does he think we should do? Just open the door and let everybody in?
He doesn't.
How workable is that? Well, yeah, I mean, true. But how is that going to work? How are you just going to let your borders open and let everybody in? How is that going to help the poor people? It doesn't, because they lose jobs or they're victims of crime. So there's a lack of realism. I don't know if that's the right word.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if you want to take a big picture, a macro view of it, the Vatican is a closed society, largely composed of older men, a great number of whom are probably homosexual, from what reports have come out. And more, average people do not see them as being relevant to their lives. How would you know what it feels like? You don't pay taxes. You don't have the deal of your kid. You don't have a kid. And your kid is not about to lose its playground or its seat in the schoolroom in favor of some illegal alien coming in and taking it.
Right.
And you don't travel the subways.
Right. You wonder if maybe the church needs to, or the leadership of the Church of the Vatican needs to be decentralized in a political sense, because all this centralization, I think these people are disconnected maybe from what goes on in other places. I mean,
well, and in some cases they're part of the problem. I've heard the figure that the NGOs, among the NGOs receiving money from the government, Catholic charities and the bishops in the United States have received many millions of dollars.
Right.
So look at that. I
No,
mean,
I agree.
they've got a hand in the jar, and they're telling us, well, no, 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 you shouldn't stop illegal immigration. It's immoral. Oh, really? And you're making money out of it.
Right. And what is moral or what is humane about having people? I mean, many of these illegal immigrants are the inventory that criminal organizations are bringing to the United States. I mean,
Exactly, exactly.
they're I mean, it's no worse than trafficking in marijuana or drugs or whatever. I've known. I mean, I've talked to some of these people who say that they pay a lot of money to get up to the border, and along the way, I mean, if you're a young woman and you're taking that trip, uh, you better, you
Yeah,
know, keep yourself private because you're probably going to be raped. And
absolutely.
I've spoken to several young Central American women here in Texas over the last few years, and they tell me that they say, we are scared to death of any guy that we see
Hmm.
because we're open game for rape,
Yeah.
and
Well,
nobody's going to stop you.
look at what's happened in Sweden. Sweden opened its doors with full, they still are. And they have a terrible crime problem, a terrible problem with sex crimes with all these people that have come in there and that are not bound by law. These are not, let me put it this way. When I hear people say, well, this country was built by immigrants, yes. But in 1850, when they were building the railroads, when it was the early industrial revolution, there was a great need for unskilled labor. That need has disappeared. If it hasn't disappeared, it is much less. And it will continue to be much less with the advent of AI, mechanized manufacturing, and processing, and things like that. So, it's a different world.
Well, also, I would think even up to the 1920s, you didn't have any kind of social welfare.
Yeah.
So if you came on that boat and you got out at Ellis Island or whatever, and you started working in a factory or whatever you did, you were basically on your own. I
Yeah.
mean, if you were not self-reliant, forget it. You were not going to make it. So it was very tough. It was
Yes.
very tough. But now, of course, many of these immigrants through some of these charities and so-called charities that help them end up receiving benefits. And I'm not against helping people, but I don't think that you help them by encouraging them to break the law and come into the United States and pretending that you know that's all there is to it.
Right.
I just think the victims of illegal immigration is one of the greatest tragedies. Especially what happens along the way when
Yes.
many of these young women are raped, and a lot of crime that happens along the way. But I don't know why the Pope got involved in all of this. I don't know why he did it, but he did it. I would like to believe that he's a decent man with a good heart who was simply trying to be a good Christian. But unfortunately, I don't think he is helping not just the Catholics, but the countries where there are Catholic churches to deal with this problem. We simply cannot take every person in the world who wants to come here.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, yeah, but you're an immigrant and you came here. Yes, I did. And I came here, but it was an orderly way. It was one country, Cuba, and it was in the middle of the Cold War. And the Congress of the United States, gave us the legal entry to the United States, kind of a political asylum kind of situation. So it's totally different than
Yes.
what you have now, where you got people from countries that I don't even know where they are on the map showing up on the border saying, "Hey, I want asylum."
Hmm.
Asylum from what? At
Yeah.
least in Cuba, they knew the U.S. government and the people in customs knew that we were coming from Cuba a communist country. They knew that. There was no need for me to explain it to a judge when I was applying for political asylum, Frank.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that I think there's one thing to remember about the Pope, and I hope they don't replicate it with the next Pope. This Pope is a Jesuit. And if you know the Jesuits, they have been in the vanguard of the far left, going way back. If you remember back during the Vietnam War.
Yes.
So you're dealing with a group that consider themselves, many of them do, I don't want to say all of them, but social justice warriors. And they're not afraid to, break a lot of rules. And in some cases, they've even left the church uh, and said, I can't keep within the bounds of even the church.
Right.
So
Well,
it's
no, you're
something that-
right. You're right. I mean, I'll never forget, though, in the early 1980s when you had the communist situation in Nicaragua, that there was a priest in Nicaragua who really went to the left. And Pope John Paul II went down there and lectured him publicly about this. Because John Paul II understood communism, pretty well.
Yes.
He lived under it. I mean, he didn't need to read any books about it. He knew about it. And so he lectured this priest openly there in front of everybody and basically told him, hey, communism is not a friend of the Catholic Church. And if anybody, again, knows that, it was the Pope, because he remembers what it was like in Poland.
Yeah.
So whoever the next Pope is, and again, we wish the current Pope a speedy recovery, but it doesn't look good. I hope the next Pope realizes that his biggest challenge right now is rebuilding the church.
Yes. And it's bringing the church closer to the reality of the people. And that is going to be very, very hard to do. Because, you have on the one hand, we're against artificial birth control. And then on the other hand, we're against abortion. And, there's a dichotomy there. And it exists on many levels. It's like the people who say, you should go to every game your child has when he's a kid, because it's the only chance you're going to get. You better be there. And on the other hand, they say you've got to support your family. You've got to. Well, suppose I'm working late. Well, I mean, you're asking me to do two things that are at odds with each other.
Yeah.
And you look at birth control. You look at the fact that in today's society, education, if you have a family, it's very expensive. I'll tell you, this week, 7 Catholic schools in New York, check out the New York Post, have closed. And why have they closed? Any number of reasons, but one of the reasons is tuition. It's very expensive now. The nuns are largely a near extinct species, as are the teaching brothers. And so it's all lay teachers. They have to be on salary and benefits. And to have a lot of kids and expect that you're going to be able to educate them, hey, not just in Catholic schools, but to raise a bunch of kids in this world is very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And they don't seem to have any. Well, why? How would they? How would they? If priests were allowed to marry and have families, then you'd have that understanding.
But well, yes, and hopefully the next Pope, and as I said before, I hate to say it, but the current Pope is not doing well, so we may have a new Pope in the next few months. I hope that he is aware of how the Catholic Church is losing members, how they're going elsewhere, and I think that's a shame, because I love the Catholic Church, and I like to see those people come back, but they're not going to come back with the Pope talking about climate change and immigration the way this one does.
Right.
They're going to come back with a message that I think is closer to John Paul II. A message where, yes, he stood against abortion, and I'm glad he did. But he also stood against other things too. He wasn't just about abortion. He was against injustice, but he
Mhm.
was also realistic because he had lived under Nazis and he had lived under communists, and he understood, that sometimes mankind is not good to its own people.
Yes. Well,
Yes,
and even with John Paul II, you had some real problems in terms of the scandal with the pedophilia
right.
in the church. And
And yes, that's true.
and these are things that I think you really have to look at it and say, unless you're willing to change the structure, unless you're willing to let priests marry so that they can understand the problems of raising a family, you really have no business giving us all this advice or making rules for everyone when it doesn't affect you. You
Right.
will
Well,
never be affected by that.
that's right. It is a complicated world, but at least as far as John Paul or Pope Francis, I hope I hope the best for him, of course, and I know he's very ill, so we hope that he recovers, but it doesn't look likely. But I hope the next pope is a more conservative figure and someone who understands. It. Let me just use an analogy here to close. When the new Secretary of Defense was approved by the Senate,
Yes,
Pete
Hegseth.
Hegseth. Okay, there you go. Somebody was saying that his biggest challenge was to increase recruiting.
Yes,
That was the biggest challenge that he had. Has a pretty good army, pretty good people, but he needs more of them. And there was a real shortage of recruits. Well, I think the next pope is going to have a similar problem with the Catholic Church because we have got to get more young people in. We got to get more people. And I mean, there are places in Europe where the Catholic Church is disappearing.
yeah.
I mean, nobody goes to church, and that has to change. And you
Well,
need a charismatic, not just charismatic, but a realistic pope that tells you, hey, we're the church, and this is where we stand, and this is why we stand the way we do, Frank.
well, it's very true. And if you look at two groups, two in the United States, and I'll say it's the African American population and the Hispanic population, both of these people share things that are very familiar to you and myself, and that is a strong family traditions,
Mm-hmm.
belief in God, but they're not finding it in the Catholic Church. They are going in many cases, people from traditionally Catholic countries are going toward the evangelicals.
Right. Well, listen, this is happening in Latin America.
Yes,
I mean, there's been a boom of these evangelical groups. I mean, you
yes,
see it all the time. All these churches that all of a sudden there's a church here, that appears. And who is this? Oh, this is this. They're really not even denominational.
yes,
They, they're,
exactly.
they're just, as they like to say, a Christian church, guided by the Bible. And that's the biggest challenge the Catholic Church faces in Latin America right now. From Mexico all the way down to Argentina. I mean, in Brazil, they've had a boom of
Yeah,
these evangelical churches, and that's the most, that's a country of 200 million people that it was historically a very Catholic country, and now not really anymore. Well, Frank, I hope we addressed the issue. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't get to?
no, I think that let me put it this way: I hope things change.
Yes.
It's going to be a very, very difficult change because we've seen what a partial change like Vatican II, we've seen some of the harm that can do. And the fact if it's not done well, if it's not done right. But I think there has to be a wholesale rethinking
Right.
of how you're going to relate to people, what it's going to take, and it's going to take an awful lot of courage to do it.
Right.
And taking another old man who's been in the church for years and who thinks that, well, we are the ultimate authority and I'm speaking for God. I'm sorry, but that's not going to do it.
Well, and the other thing too is that I hope when they're selecting the new pope that they don't feel committed. In other words, I think there was a little bit of identity politics with Pope
Hmm.
Francis in the sense that they wanted to have somebody from Latin America. I don't really care where he comes from, Frank.
Right,
I
exactly.
mean, if he's from Norway, I don't care where he comes from,
Yeah.
as long as it's a strong figure. It doesn't have to be Italian. He doesn't have to be African. He doesn't have to be Latin American. I don't care where he comes from. As long as it's a strong figure who can speak well and can represent the church and understands the needs of the church to grow and bring back many of the people who've left. Well, Frank, I'm going to leave you with a not a trivia question, but do you know what the number one song in the United States was today? Okay, I know you
Yeah,
don't know the answer.
I do not, Silvio.
I'm going to set you up for this one. I
You are the rocker.
well, I just saw this today. 1966. So that would make it what, 59? 59
Yeah,
years
yeah.
ago? 59, if you can believe this. Number one song in the country was the Rolling Stones' 19th Nervous Breakdown.
Wow.
That's a crazy song,
I haven't heard of that in years.
Well, most people haven't. It's only people like me who get into this kind of stuff. But that song about the 19th nervous breakdown, it's about a woman who keeps having these nervous breakdowns, and she's up to 19 already. So anyway, so I just thought that might be a good theme song for the Democrats right now.
I think it sounds like it would relate very well to Hillary
Yes,
and
certainly.
to Kamala.
Maxine Waters might be a good face of that song.
Well,
But
this is one thing, just parenthetically.
sure.
I think it's time to sweep the idiots out of Congress. There are people in there who know nothing. Your Swalwells and your
Yes.
Maxine Waters and the guy
AOC.
Johnson, AOC.
AOC. Yeah.
Johnson from Florida, who thought that Guam was going to tip over if you added more people to the island.
Well, I think the key, Frank, is, or not the key, but the problem is that unfortunately, these people may be idiots, but they're being elected by idiots. And
Yes.
I think that's the real problem. How do we get people to make more serious choices? And that's, I don't know. I cannot handle that one, or we'll have to deal with that one in a future show. But Frank, have a great day, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and very sincerely, God bless you, your family, our audience, and the Pope.
That's right. I agree with that. I agree with that. Our good friend Frank Burke, author, businessman, great friend of our show. We have done several of these shows before. My favorite shows continue to be when he reads the Gettysburg Address or stuff like that we've done in the past. When he does a Christmas reading, always enjoy those shows with him. But today we talked a little bit about the Catholic Church and some of the challenges, and of course the sad news that the Pope is in bad health, and we're hoping for a recovery, but it doesn't look good for the Pope. He's apparently in the hospital, and I saw some reports early this morning that he is, probably he's not going to make it. But let's hope those reports are wrong, because we always want people to make it when they're sick. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.